Welcome, everyone. This is another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we do have a great show lined up for you all today. But before we get into all of that, I just want to thank you for joining us this week. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below. Not smash that comment button, like Charles said last week. Although if you do want to smash the comment button, you are welcome to. If you want access to our Discord server, make sure to head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/mindsculptors, or check out the link in the description. If you want to pre-order any of the cards we will be talking about today, we have a TCG Player affiliate link. Go ahead and click on that down there, and a portion of that will head over to us, and we greatly appreciate that, as it turns out this is an expensive hobby. Joining me today for this set review as we answer the question, is Kamigawa Neon Dynasty the set that breaks cEDH? Joining me today in the flesh up from the Montreal area is my good friend Pongo. Pongo, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. I can't believe you would even ask that question, Callahan. I'm offended. I'm going to write an angry letter about it.
Also joining me from Washington, D.C. is our good friend Charles Wang, the mono white guy. Although in our Discord you've renamed yourself, and we'll touch on that here in a second. But how are you doing today, Charles?
I'm doing pretty well. Also, I said tap the comment because
that's right. You
I was trying to make a pun about tapping the like button and and tapping the share button, but you can't really tap the comment button. It's not even a button.
It's because you want to smash that subscribe button.
You got to smash it. Oh yeah, take your anger out on the like button.
Yeah,
smash that sub button.
Show those buttons who's boss.
Yeah, no kidding. So as you can see, I am repping all of my Los Angeles Rams merch, and it is Wednesday, and this will come out the day after the Super Bowl. So I have no idea if I'm going to look like a fool or not. I'm really hoping this doesn't look and come off like, how they'll make the t-shirts ready to go, and then if the losing team, they send the losing team shirts to Africa or some shit. Have you ever seen that, Pongo?
No, but I mean, it sounds like a great initiative. I'm
what they do.
So I think both teams should lose from now on.
So yeah, the idea is that the reason why they can get these Super Bowl winning shirts so immediately after a team has won is that they don't actually know which team is going to win. I'm pretty sure there's some conspiracy theorist that is the Super Bowl's rigged. No, it's really that they actually just print the winning jerseys of both teams,
right? And
whichever team wins, they sell those shirts, and the losing team's winning jerseys, they just throw it to some other place.
It's more important to be quick than to have the best margin possible, basically.
It's almost, I believe it's specifically so that they can sell them very quickly, but also so that they can give them to the winning team the moment it happens, which is kind of the idea. So what you got to understand is at SoFi Stadium, somewhere in that building is just a bunch of boxes of either if the Rams win, a bunch of Bengals won the Super Bowl t-shirts that are going to be shipped off somewhere, or Rams shirts, which would be sadder because SoFi Stadium is the Rams home stadium.
Oh man.
So
I feel like the home team advantage.
Those shirts from the losing team that say they won ought to be worth something. If you were to try to sell them on eBay, right? If you got your hands on some of them, I feel like that would be lucrative. I don't, or maybe it's if you wear that, you're a dipshit or something. I don't know.
See, if I did it, if I could if the Rams somehow lose, or if the Rams lost last night, I would love to get a hold of one. And then I don't know if you've seen the SNL bit, but from when Timothy Chalamet hosted, he and Pete Davidson did this bit where they they were mocking Newsmax, talking about how Donald Trump had like lost the election, and instead it was Sportsmax, and they were talking about how Timothy Chalamet wore a Jets three-peat t-shirt that I desperately want, where it had like for 3 years in a row the Jets had won the Super Bowl, and they're going through all these stats and stuff. It's a really good bit. You should watch it. But it's one of my favorite SNL bits of all time. Cassidy and I, my wife and I, want to, for Halloween this year, go as their characters from that skit. And nobody will get it except the two of us. But
you should go as Elmo and a cookie instead.
Don't you mean Elmo and a rock?
Elmo and a rock. Yeah.
That's
like a reference to a reference.
A Twitter.
It was a reference. Like
it's a reference to a Twitter post.
How meta.
Well, I'm referencing the fact that Callahan mentioned the Elmo.
It was like 2 or 3 weeks
ago on this very podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, Elmo did get played on our podcast, yelling about how Rocco is just a rock. But anyhow, so we have a few cards to go through today. And up first, we're going to be talking about the potential commanders coming out of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. And the first one is from the commander set. This one you can only get in
set boosters. And that is Yoshimaru Ever Faithful, which is a single white mana legendary dog. That is a 1/1 with partner, boys and girls. We got a new partner.
Surprise.
That says whenever another legendary permanent enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Yoshimaru. So Charles, I'm going to throw this one to you because you're brewing around it right now, but there's a lot of people brewing around it in general that are excited about this card. And what is kind of the reason for the excitement behind like what makes people like this other than this is a very good boy?
Oh man, I was about to say because it's a very good boy.
You do way to take the wind out of our sails, Callahan.
Yeah.
I got you, babe.
All right, so it's 1 mana. We've seen other like 1 mana commanders or 0 mana commanders nowadays with like Rogue Rag, and there are like I'm pretty sure dozens, if not more, like Yoshimaru X Rogue Rag type of decks, and it's the idea that you really have like a really efficient start. You're almost guaranteed to just have this landing on turn 1, and players just like that feeling in general. When we talk about this from a competitive standpoint, at least from like my perspective as a mono white player and someone who plays stacks, this is just particularly important because one of the problems for a lot of stacks like decks is your curve out. And like even when you look at something like Winota actually does this pretty fine because you have certain stacks creatures that you play that incidentally become your value engines from Winota.
Winota just has like an absurd amount of like card advantage that it gets.
Yeah, it's really nice when Archon of Emeria can find you another like or Eidolon of Rhetoric can find you like another card like that. But you also have to consider
Callahan and Co. They always played Grafdigger's Cage or removed.
I like mulligan for Grafdigger's
every
Cage.
time.
so
it's painful.
Okay, so putting it in that kind of perspective, right? For at least people who play stacks, is you do consider about your curve. Yoshimaru is pretty great because it actually kind of goes behind your curve. And what I mean by that is that, Archon of Emeria costs 3 mana, and you usually set up with the Archon of Emeria before you start pummeling your opponents to death, right? Whereas Yoshimaru, you can actually start pummeling your opponents to death immediately, right? You go into Yoshimaru, you play Athalia, it triggers, Yoshimaru gets a +1/+1 counter, right? You played like, second Thalia, Heretic of Cathar, or you play Yasharn or something like that. These are all legendary.
Didn't you have like a Twitter thread that was going through like your dream Yoshimaru line?
Yes.
Like the most like,
oh yeah.
The
most
nuts.
explosive Yoshimaru aggro.
It's not even the most explosive because I forgot that you could just play Mox Amber, which is also legendary.
How could you forget Mox Amber?
Mox Opal is also legendary. Hello.
It's also legendary,
which is hilarious.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, this might give fuel for thought for some people who are building Yoshimaru, but like, Yoshimaru triggers not only from legendary creatures, it also triggers from like legendary lands, like Nykthos, Blackstone Social Care, and
certain cards we'll be talking about later.
Yeah,
on
certain cards we'll be talking about.
Named.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of flexibility when you're playing with Yoshimaru, especially when you start slapping on other colors and stuff like that. It becomes more of a question of like how you want to build around Yoshimaru, and I think that for certain players who are running Yoshimaru as a partner, you do now kind of have to like think about this from another perspective. Is like Tinda is also white, and like white as in color pie white, but like she's also got black, right? And so why Yoshimaru over Tinda? You're choosing a partner with one less pip in that regard. And so if you're going to build Yoshimaru, you almost have to be on this type of Yoshimaru game plan. And then you have to think about how many eggs are you putting into that basket?
Right.
Because if they interact with Yoshimaru, they bounce or remove it. Do you have a good way to pivot from that? Or are you able to, reestablish that pressure with Yoshimaru again? Like, what is it that you're kind of doing there?
It's interesting because in that kind of harkens back to something that Pongo, Phoenix, and I talked about a few weeks ago when we were talking about Commander 2016, is that what's nice about like the partners from like Commander Legends is in general, they all kind of like push you towards like some sort of game plan that isn't just draw cards.
Yeah, they're not generic.
What'd you say, Pongo?
I was saying they're not generic. Like they're not generically good.
And I think that's partially why I really like this, is because especially as a partner, it's not just a generic good card. It's designed to push you in a particular direction. Right. And I think that's really cool. And I posted this on Twitter because I talked about like that sort of like counters theme sort of thing with Raihan, as I think like Raihan's been a very like underexplored commander. This feels like a deck, Yoshimaru, that like would be an excellent partner for Raihan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love it with all that you can do with it. The dream play that I had was that you could curve this into a Thalia and into two different Thalias and a Linvala, and also also eliminate a player by like turn 3 and be ready to eliminate another player by turn 4.
That's crazy.
So yeah, I mean, Yoshimaru can swing for 22 lethal commander damage on like turn 3.
Yeah, that's going to take some very specific hands. Assuming you're planning on just curving out with legendary cards. But obviously there's other ways to go with Yoshimaru, right? Where you can increase his power, not necessarily purely through casting legendary cards and playing legendary lands. I like how in your discussion of Yoshimaru, you only touched upon what I consider to be the acceptable way of building Yoshimaru, and you didn't touch upon the unacceptable.
Not Tevish that. Not Tevish that. We're not going to talk about.
We don't talk about that. I don't. I'm okay with moving on from this because that's probably what we would have to talk about.
Don't hurt
next.
the good boy.
Okay.
So there is another way to build this deck, but don't.
It's evil. It's demented.
Look, Rebel will find you and murder your machine with some sort of AI like abilities. Okay, if she found out that you were doing Tevish Zat things to Yoshimaru,
we'll all come after you.
Yeah, like Rograk is gonna steal your husband or your wife like behind your back without you realizing it. Sacrifice him to Tevish Zat. You know what I mean? Like take it out on Rograk, but don't take it out on Yoshimaru. Yoshimaru is faithful, ever faithful, never do that to you. Don't.
Yoshimaru will sit there and wait
like
for
that.
you.
Dude, watch the Futurama episode with Fry's dog. Right?
See, when I see this, because I'm gonna nickname this card will get nicknamed Yoshi very quick, and I see this, and when it gets really big, I really want to get a specific Yoshimaru what is it? Token or not token?
Like stuffed animal
proxy. That is the big Yoshi. And Big Yoshi, and then once it like gets to a certain power level, I switch it out, and it's now Big Yoshi.
Oh, you should do Yoshi Jessica then. That's kind of like the direction that I was interested in going, because just tripling Yoshi's power,
that would actually be really good.
Yeah, that's like a way to get very lethal very quick. Yeah,
right.
I mean, and that's part of what I like about this card is it encourages you to explore combat, and it also encourages you, like, this is a card that I think is like a legitimate good, like, other than like Crom, right? Like, is a good card for stacks to be like the general of, because this is just going to get big real fast, and like if people can't deal with it and you can protect it, then
like I could legitimately port my casual Ragavan deck to Boros and have like Yoshi as one of the commanders, and like keep kind of a very similar early game plan like curve of just like, you know, starting with your 1-drop and getting aggressive. Obviously, like a big part of that deck is the treasures from Ragavan, so it's like not a seamless swap, but like, you know what I mean, getting an extra color, getting white in that deck. It's crazy to me. Like I never wanted to add white to a deck more than that one, like over any other color.
So real quick about what you had said about Yoshimaru and Jessica. This is exactly kind of like what I was talking about, because we do have other partners with white in their costs, and immediately when you said Yoshimaru and Jessica, I was thinking of Jessica Ishai or Jeskai, right? Because it's similar line paths where it's like and similar, almost kind of like similar in terms of like theme as well, because whereas Yoshimaru gets bigger from what you're doing, Ishai gets bigger from what your opponents are doing,
right?
And Jessica facilitates like the bone snapping end of someone getting the short end of the stick. And the major difference is that Ishai costs 4 mana, whereas Yoshimaru, you could just plop it down even from like a bad start. But the payoff, if you invested in Ishai, is that Ishai flies, right? Whereas Yoshimaru does not have any form of evasion or like trample or menace, right?
I think, and this is something, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this, but is that like you can, I think Yoshi Jessica plays a lot different. Like it's conceptually very similar to Jessica Shy. But Yoshi Jessica, in my opinion, would be playing like a Stoneforge package probably. Would probably be playing some amount of like control-y stacks elements instead of being also a breach deck.
Right.
Which
like
is
less
kind
tempo,
of
more stacks.
Yeah. I know like Adam from like Casually Competitive has been playing Jessica is Shy similarly to how I play Art and Crom. But like that's kind of the big difference, I would say, is that I think Yoshi Jessica's niche is it plays much more internally and much more control-y, where Jessica is Shy, I feel like is much more, would end up being much more proactive in terms of like combos and stuff like that.
That's very interesting, because this just might be my place. I always consider the combo in Jessica is Shy to be kind of like the plan B in a way.
Oh, because, I hate that. I hate that it's in those decks. Literally, if I built Jessica is Shy, I would probably build like a Rule of Law version of it or something like that.
Yeah, well, Rebel and I actually talked about this. She had a video like a while back that talked about Delver style decks, and Jessica is Shy was sort of in the contender of we were thinking about remodeling it into a Delver style play deck, because we were taking influences from like other Eternal formats, and she wanted to do something that was more Delver-like. I mean, the addition of blue lends itself so that you could just defend your Voltron commander in a way to like just get in. But I also agree with you. Like the absence of blue also allows you to play other stacks pieces that blue would not want to deal with, right? And I think like some players might not realize that like more colors doesn't necessarily mean that you're better than a monocolor or a dual color or a tricolor, because it's kind of like the Amazo effect in DC Comics, where Amazo takes all of like the DC Comics superheroes' powers, and he takes Superman's powers, or it takes Superman's powers, but it also takes Superman's weaknesses as well. Right. And when we talk about building decks with Yoshimaru and justifying the fact that you are using a monocolor partner, right, with something else, right, you're not necessarily handicapping yourself with the lack of the other color, but you do need to think about sort of how you're brewing this. But I think we do see that this card has good potential given its cost, given its rate, given its flexibility as well, and what you could do with it.
I've been brewing Arden Yoshi as like a mono white Death and Taxes list. And I just, while you were talking, thought of just the beautiful line of turn one land, play Yoshi, play Jeweled Lotus, get a counter, crack Jeweled Lotus, play Arden, get another counter. Just, so good. Speaking of cards that you can play with Arden, the next card on our list is, all right, this is a bit of a mouthful, is a legendary artifact creature with the subtypes Equipment Jellyfish. And that's the reality chip. It is a colorless and blue 0/4 that says you may look at the top card of your library anytime. As long as the reality chip is attached to a creature, you may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. And it has a new ability called Reconfigure, which costs 2 in this instance, 2 colorless and a blue. And what Reconfigure says is attached to target creature you control or unattached from a creature. Reconfigure only as a sorcery. While attached, this isn't a creature. Before we get too deep into this card, I do want to explain some things with Reconfigure and these equipment creatures, because they're going to come up several times in this set review. Reconfigure, as the comprehensive rules have been updated. So I'm probably going to put them up on the screen right now for you. So if you're a podcast listener, you just have to listen to me. But so basically the TLDR is they made it work so that things like Sigarda's Aid, Arden, Pure Steel Paladin can attach these to creatures. The 301.5C rule has been changed. Or has been added, I think. That this is the rule that says an equipment, or no, it has been changed. This is a rule that says an equipment that's also a creature can't equip a creature. Obviously, this needs to change for Reconfigure to work correctly. Now this rule has an exception for equipment with Reconfigure. And then they also changed the sub-rule 702.151 that basically defines the keyword of Reconfigure and basically makes that the rest of the part that really matters is the bottom part here, where it says the rest of the sub-rules in the section explain and when in effect attaches an equipment with Reconfigure to another creature, it also causes the equipment to stop being a creature as long as it's attached, and that if it's still somehow a creature after that, it becomes unattached. So all of that to say, Arden works, Pure Steel Paladin works,
Reconfigure
Sigarda's Aid works. What'd you say?
Reconfigure works, period.
Yes.
Because it didn't originally.
Yes. But it's interesting to note that like equip reduction costs don't work on this. So stuff like the War Nahiri doesn't decrease Reconfigure costs. Right. So that is like an important thing. Like right here, I think it's important to kind of talk about like that mechanic, because when it was first introduced, there was all these questions about it. And I kind of felt very confidently that the second part of the reconfigurability while attached this is any creature made it very clear that those effects worked, but there was some confusion about it. So the rules, people had to come out on Twitter. There was a huge long thread about how it worked with all these different cards.
Mm-hmm. I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I read it more as like a static ability. Like reconfigure is weird because it's like, like how blind obedience has extort, which is a triggered ability, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it just says extort, like for some of those cards, like they don't even have the reminder text here. And reconfigure and equip are both activated abilities, but reconfigure also implies a hidden static ability of the card that you just mentioned.
Well, and that is where the new like card type that they've kind of made.
Well, except it's still an equipment, right? And so the issue was that it didn't work with the rules for equipment.
Right. And it's always an equipment regardless of if it's attached or if it's just sitting there as a creature. It's still an equipment. And so that is an interesting thing here too. And we're going to see this later on. I don't know if we have any on our list, but I will mention that. Oh, we do have one on the list. Is how we have legendary artifact creature with the subtype equipment jellyfish. Equipment is not a creature type.
Right.
And so you can't like tutor up like what are they called? Shapeshifters or whatever.
Right. With equipment tutors.
They don't have the subtype equipment. That is the subtype of artifact. And I know it's very confusing templating. The problem is there's like no other good way to template that. Like
like
completely
drastically changing
the
things.
Entire frame of a magic card. Yeah.
So like it's awkward, it's not intuitive, but I'm going to mention this over and over again, and we'll see this later with like the enchantments because shrines are also seeing the similar thing. Is that equipment is not a creature type. Jellyfish is a creature type though. But to get into this card, this is effectively a 2 mana, what's it called?
Future Sight.
Future Sight. Why I couldn't remember why I could get that card. This card is very, very good. And Pongo, I know Rebel did a video talking about how this can be its own commander and how it has a combo with, the classic top combo. But in the greater scope, like obviously this is a no-brainer in blue Arden decks, right? Like that's a pretty easy sell.
Yeah, I actually didn't watch Rebel's video on it. I was going to say that no offense to Rebel, just not enough time in the day, unfortunately, to watch everything. But yeah, I was going to say this is, from my perspective, like the best mono blue commander now. Which might be
even over Urza.
Oh yeah, like even over Urza. And we can get into that after, but like, yeah, as you were talking about before, with the segue, it's certainly, this makes a lot of sense in like a blue white X, potentially X, Arden deck, where you're gonna cheat on that reconfigure cost by attaching it to a creature. At which point, yes, you do have indeed a 2 mana Future Sight. And Future Sight historically very powerful, very broken
Turns
card.
out.
Very, very strong. So getting that for 2 mana is huge. Of the cards that you are like now testing in Arden Crom, Callahan, this is I think one of the few where I was like I didn't highlight it as like I'm not a big fan or like I'm not sure about this card. I was just like, oh yeah, the reality.
Oh yeah, this is obvious.
It's just in, it's like there's no question about that. This is absurd for that deck. Really, really great get. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this potentially, start cropping up in other decks too. It's really, really powerful, and being able to split up the cost of such a powerful effect as Future Sight is quite good.
And one thing to point out with this is it's a Tymna blocker, it's a Najeela blocker. It's got a big booty.
Sure, at least initially, yeah. And obviously after you equip it, then no. But
but initially it comes in and can block before you attach it to something.
Yeah, and I think that at where it's coming down on the curve, that is certainly relevant. So it's not irrelevant upside. Even though, it's not the reason why you're running the card. It's just kind of a nice bonus. But as far as this card as its own commander, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty high on it. I think that, as I was saying before, quite possibly the best mono blue commander now in the format. Urza, on the one hand, certainly, makes mana, makes a construct, does some cool things with stacks. That's all well and good. But
polymorph.
Well, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. Urza does have, to this day, still a bit of an issue with win con density and access to win cons. And some of the concessions that you have to make for your win con are concessions that the reality chip does not have to make. The reality chip is a more powerful card advantage engine by my estimation, because Urza, while you can spend 5 mana to get a Mind's Desire effect, with the high density of interaction that you're playing in your deck, doesn't actually convert to useful material a lot of the time that you're doing it. So mostly you're using it as an outlet. Whereas here, you've got 2-card combos that are entirely artifact based, which, as somebody who built who built Kinnan to abuse the tutorability of artifacts in blue decks, that is something I can really speak to as being such a powerful boon for like that deck, for instance. And it carries over to here. Your access to your win conditions is really when you're talking about artifacts, and when you're talking about artifacts that you can play a fairly high amount of redundancy on, or kind of, and in addition are kind of just generically good, as well as value pieces, really just starts making the deck, I would say, much more consistent, and also improves the card quality of the deck tremendously. You're essentially just looking to assemble Sensei's Divining Top and like one of your creatures that reduce the cost of artifacts, and then you've assembled the entire combo. Because you even have a creature at that point to reconfigure onto, and then you can draw your entire deck. So it's
you could just tutor
interesting.
I was gonna say you could just tutor for like Ethereum Sculptor, and you're just there.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Ethereum Sculptor, very easy to tutor for, very efficient, and also like makes the rest of your combo cheaper. Like you don't have to play the reality chip before that, so like you can just kind of like get a discount on it. And then sure, you have to pay the reconfigure cost, but like,
after that, that's just 4 mana.
That's
right?
just
like,
4 mana at that point.
Yeah.
Or, you could even just play the reality chip and then 3 mana later down the line. Ultimately, it's not a major ask, and probably given that you're playing mono blue, there's like a not unreasonable chance that at some point along the way, you wanted to just reconfigure the reality chip to have Future Sight. So it's just Future Sight in the command zone with an easy to assemble combo.
That's what people said about like Elsha, and this is like miles better than Elsha by my estimation.
Well, so Elsha has better access to colors. The issue when you compare Elsha to the reality chip, I think, is just the CMC.
The cost, I was going to say that too.
And so that's the major advantage here. Like 2 mana, and like it's just such a cheap Future Sight effect.
Having the ability to statically, even without it like equipped, to just be able to look at the top card, it lets you be able to go on counterbalance without you're able to like look at your top card really whenever you want. So it makes counterbalance extremely more playable, especially with this in your deck, I would say, or particularly as your commander.
You have really good control of the information that you present with counterbalance, and I think that that's a very important thing when we go into like play patterns. Because one of the things about counterbalance, like people have done this with like Crom and counterbalance, where the person casts their second spell, they reveal the card off of counterbalance, and then they draw it, right? Or, they draw the card first and then they reveal the card. And these types, there's different reasons for why you
plan to abuse this in that specific scenario with the reality chip attached to Chrome.
Yeah. I mean, because it really is like, mind fuckery with your opponents. You choose what information you reveal to your opponent, whereas like before, you and your opponent both have to find out at the same time, right? And that gives you a lot of control and leverage. It helps with like the type of bluffs that you would want to be doing as a blue player, because that is sort of blue's play style, right? And yeah, I agree with pretty much everything that Pongo said. I kind of want to almost go back real quick about what you had mentioned about Pure Steel Paladin, Callahan, because I feel like someone in the comments, and maybe they've already typed this out now and submitted it, are going to be like, but Pure Steel Paladin only says equip. Pure Steel Paladin, by the way, says that your equipments have equip 0 as an ability.
Right. It's a second ability.
Yeah.
It adds the ability.
Yeah, it's not an equipment reduction cost effect like what Callahan was saying. It's literally Jellyfish gets a second ability.
Yep.
And the static ability that's part of Reconfigure still allows equip 0 to work, right? So this is just something that I want to clarify.
Absolutely. These artifact creatures, there's like 2 of them specifically that are just bonkers. And then like the rest of them are kind of like hit or miss. But like this, and there's the other white one we'll talk about, is just exceptionally good. And I'm really excited about these in Art and Crom. And that's the axis I look at this as, is because I see this and I was just like, this does exactly what that deck wants to do. It's extra card advantage, which that deck already has an absurd amount of card advantage in anyhow. But it's just like, it's very exciting to see this, because I was like, oh, cool, I get to play Future Sight now. For 2 mana. Sweet.
I'm not sure. I might be showing my age. I think back when I was playing Magic in Mirrodin, like the original Mirrodin, there was a blue spell that you could just attach an equipment onto something, like a steel equipment spell, similar to like a steel aura.
Like specifically so one where you steal it, or one that is more like a magnetic like theft? Magnetic
theft. Like a blue version of a magnetic theft.
There's also I guess card. You can kind of steal it at that point, right? Because you don't control the ability. You're not actually stealing control of the equipment, but
which is important to talk about with Arden, by the way. We've talked about this before, but Arden can skull clamp your opponent's X1s, and you draw the cards because you control the skull clamp.
I feel like I need to preempt the commentators or the commenters on this one a little bit, but I feel like Arden is quickly becoming the new Lavinia.
Yes. 100%.
It's just... Yes. Yeah. Every episode.
Not even close.
It's we don't even talk about Lavinia in this house anymore. Lavinia, I don't even know. I don't even recognize her.
Okay. So I remember now.
If it makes you if it gives you any inclination of my fallout with Lavinia, is she got cut from Arden Crom because she just was a dead card.
Okay. So man, I wonder what the divorce papers look like. So real quick, the card I was thinking about was called Carried Away, and it was from like Darksteel, but that's an aura. It's you don't have to look it up. It's not that great. But there is a throwback to it called Grip of Phyresis
that's was printed in a thinking of.
Yeah, where you can gain control of the equipment and just attach it to like a germ creature that the card itself creates. Right.
There's also Fumble.
And it's instant.
Yeah, I remember when that one was printed, and I was like, this is a really cool card. I'm never going to play it, but it's really cool.
Yeah.
There's also Fumble from Battle Bond, which bounces any creature, and then attaches all auras and equipments on it to another creature you control, which is kind of neat. That's a card I've put in like the sideboard of Arden Crom, where I'm like, if you're in a heavy Arden meta for some reason, this is a card to think about. I don't know why you would be in a heavy Arden meta, but the difference though, by the way, to swing back to the Lavinia thing, Pongo, the difference between my love life with Arden and my love life with Lavinia is Arden doesn't hurt me.
Yeah. I mean,
this is like a good relationship.
It's a healthier relationship, yeah.
It's not a toxic relationship anymore.
But how does Crom factor into all this though?
Crom's just there. It's
polyamorous.
He's there.
Is Crom there?
Crom is there for when we want to spice things up.
Okay, so you're saying like most of the time he's just looking out from inside the closet, and then every once in a while he's allowed out of the closet.
Yeah, every now it's specifically when we need to start beating people in the face and we need to get rough is when Crom comes out.
All right, all right, I'm muting myself. I don't want
the Mind Sculptors After Dark. Yeah.
Speaking of Azorius cards, the next card on our list is Tameshi Reality Architect. I can speak. Which is a 2 colorless and a blue legendary Moonfolk wizard with power and toughness 2 and 3 that says whenever one or more non-creature permanents are returned to hand, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. It also has a activated ability that costs X and a white, return a land you control to its owner's hand. And then the ability is return target artifact or enchantment card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. So the immediate thing, Charles, that everybody kind of went to with this is like a turns commander, right? Like this was kind of the immediate thing where people are like, oh, we can do a lot of turns shenanigans with this, with Mystic Sanctuary and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I saw people posting that in like the Commander Facebook group, like the general one, not the competitive EDH one. And I think later on I saw something in the competitive EDH ones. If you guys listen to like Josh Second Seven, we did like a quick cap on this card, and I was really excited about this because I feel like this opens up a lot of different kind of play lines. It's very interesting. I thought of it more as like something they can do in like a stacks deck because the activated ability goes underneath Rule of Law, like because you're not casting the artifact or enchantment from the graveyard, and it's particularly in stacks where you are playing a density of artifacts and enchantments. You could play this pretty well into that, and I was thinking more of like different possibilities in my mind about like the different kinds of interactions you have. I'm not particularly too sure about, whether or not they're cEDH. They're good enough in like the fast paced stuff of cEDH, but I think that this card does something interesting for blue white when we talk about playing a stacks value type of deck. So that's sort of like where my mind is about this card. You also, I'm just going to throw this out there. He's a Moonfolk, Patron of the Moon exists, and you could actually, do a Moonfolk offering with this guy, and maybe you can start looping with Lion's Eye Diamond. I don't know.
Keep talking.
I'm wondering where we're going with this. I'm transfixed. So
what? God damn it.
Oh dang. Yeah,
what are your thoughts about Tameshi?
We were talking about this earlier before we started recording. We were comparing it to Taigem, right? As the extra turns commander. And that's kind of where I see this commander ultimately going. And I feel like a lot of the other things are probably not going to be consistent enough. Or powerful enough to really supplant that as the gimmick. I think what we had kind of sort of come to the conclusion about, at least as far as that comparison is concerned, is that it feels like Taigem is stronger as a card. But, Tameshi has the advantage of being Taigem is better according to Callahan, but Tameshi has the advantage
only for the YouTube audience gets to see that.
That's
a whiteboard behind me.
Fair. Tameshi has the advantage of being a 3-drop on the one hand, a little less threatening than Taigem, which is not irrelevant. Additionally, the requirements for the combo I think are a little bit simpler with Tameshi, which is not irrelevant in those colors, needing only the extra turn spell and then your Mystic Sanctuary that you can get with like any of your fetch lands is pretty big as far as I'm concerned, because kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the reality chip is when you're in those colors, when you're in low colors, it's the difficulty is always consistency, and the difficulty is always access to your win conditions. And the more pieces and sort of the less they are in your color combinations wheelhouse as far as tutorability is concerned, the less consistent your combo access is for these low color decks. This is rarely an issue for any deck with black, but as soon as you lose out on the demonic tutor, the vampiric tutor, the imperial seal, if you want to go even further, you can. Then yeah, you start running into some consistency issues.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is very interesting is like the ability on it. I think since we've been talking, I kind of think it, like, I get what you're saying, Pongo, but I actually think the build that will end up being more successful is the Staxier build. And I think that's just because I think like blue-white turns is bad. Like, I just don't think it's a particularly good archetype.
It's certainly possible. I mean, I was not even talking about the viability of that as an archetype, right?
Yeah, he was doing like a compare and contrast between Taiga and Tameshi, right?
Which I think, that may be the case, but it's ultimately irrelevant, right? Because people will play the commander if they like the commander. And so what direction are they going to go with the commander? I feel like stacks plus turns is a viable direction for this commander. So,
I think that would make a lot of sense, but like some of the people that are trying to make this like a turbo turns deck, I'm just like, they're just better shells for that, and it's not even a good shell to begin with, in my opinion.
This card does not seem like a turbo style deck to me at all.
No,
I mean blue-white, in my opinion, just doesn't feel like a turbo color pairing.
I mean, the issue is that as is, you're not getting a ton of value off of your turn spells, right? Whereas Taigam does, and that's what you're getting at. So Taigam is the better card, no doubt about it. Yeah. But again, this is not a commander, by my estimation, that is looking to cast a turn spell and really get value off of it. It's looking to cast a turn spell and then cast a turn spell and then cast a turn spell, and then no one else is taking a turn.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know what is going to be really good though and high value, and is it really makes this whole entire discussion mute, is the next card on our list, which is Shorikai Genesis Engine. This is a 2 colorless, a white blue legendary artifact vehicle that is an 8/8 that has the activated ability 1, and you tap it, you draw 2 cards, then you discard a card, and then create a 1/1 colorless pilot creature token with this creature crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So it ends up crewing as like 3. It also has this funny little text at the bottom of it that says Shorikai Genesis Engine can be your commander. That's right, folks. A legendary artifact vehicle can be your commander in blue-white. It's a scepter outlet. It is a mana outlet. It draws cards. It makes creatures that block. Need to get in there to do some damage and get some commander damage in there. Oh, it does that. Also, it's an incredibly good poly-horror enabler. This card is literally, like, I think, Pongo, we've talked about this before when we've talked about like blue-white, that the minute blue-white gets a scepter outlet that does like anything slightly relevant other than being a scepter outlet, it's going to be like shoot to the top of being the blue-white commander. And we got that and more.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like, exactly to your point, and sort of along the lines of like what I was talking about earlier as well, Dramatic Scepter is a combo that is feasible to assemble in these colors.
It's actually very simple to set up in these colors.
Not as easy, I think, as it is in blue-green. But not so far off, you know what I mean? And then, as you were saying before, this has a lot of other upsides that these colors really appreciate having. So yeah, I think this is a really cool commander. It doesn't solve all the issues in blue-white, but that's kind of just inherent to the colors more so than to any particular commander. That being said, I'm happy to see this card. I think it's a step in the right direction for blue-white as a color pair. It certainly solves a major problem. And then, I think with time, the other aspects will gradually kind of lessen in terms of in terms of how much of an issue they are.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I really like about this card is, as somebody who plays a lot of blue-white, like even my Ardent Crom deck is like mostly blue-white, and then there's Ragavan and Dockside, right? Like Shorikai is very interesting from a lot of perspectives, but like the fact that it just does so many things for one, like in the rate that you're doing them at is like very efficient.
Yeah.
Like 1 mana to draw 2 discard and make a 1/1 is an incredibly good rate.
Yeah, it gives you a good amount of material, which is obviously important in these colors because a lot of the time you are just slowing down the game. And when you're doing that, it tends to help to be able to be drawing cards. So, you've, like you were saying before, you have that axis and you've got it as an outlet. One thing that I think is particularly important to highlight about this card, that might not, people might not necessarily think about on first glance, is the fact that it is not a creature when it comes out of the command zone, which means that it is not affected by summoning sickness, which means that that tap part is not a downside. At least from the perspective of, okay, I got my scepter, I've got infinite mana,
I gotta wait a turn.
I can just straight out of my command zone have everything. I don't have to wait a turn cycle or anything like that. Thankfully, just make sure you don't crew it, because then that's when you'll run into problems.
Yeah. Then
that's why it calls crew 8. So you
have a hard time screwing it up. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. But this is one of the things, and we've talked about this before on this podcast, of like the issue Lavinia always runs into is, how do we win the game? Or, it needs to have some way to do that. And Shorikai really solves that question for blue-white it doesn't fix the problem, right? But it answers a lot of issues that the color pairing has had for a really long time. And the fact that it is an outlet in the command zone for a combo that is pretty easy to assemble in the colors is pretty exciting. And I think it's all the different builds of this, I think, are all viable and all intriguing. There's poly tyrant, poly horror versions of this. There's scepter combos. There's some that are like hybrid between the two, because you can just do a hybrid version of it.
Rebels version
it's
of
not
it,
a creature.
Rebels version of it just has you crew the damn thing and swing with it. I mean,
right.
And that's what's so neat about it, is it can wear a lot of hats, and it can win through a variety of manners, which is something that blue-white has really historically struggled with closing the game. This gives you a way to close the game.
I think like part of like blue-white's problem sometimes is that it focuses too much on a fixed game plan and doesn't necessarily have enough modularity, or sometimes it's too generalized that it doesn't that it doesn't do enough to like hone in on a thing. And I think that Shorikai actually hits like a really sweet spot. I really do like Pongo's point and want to emphasize what he had said about the lack of summoning sickness, but also just the fact that, this isn't a creature and it's not a planeswalker. This is the first commander that is like of its kind in a way. and you can play it from the command zone. And there's a lot of benefits.
This is your humility deck if you wanted to build a humility deck.
Yeah,
exactly.
Honestly.
Like the pilots are 1/1s already, right? You could play, humility with this. And the other thing is that your opponents cannot, like, the problem with planeswalkers as commanders is that your opponents can always interact with them by attacking them. This hits on an axis that's just really hard for your opponent to like deal with unless they're like, here's an abrade or something like that. But you're also blue-white, right? You have ways,
it's going to be like, it's one of those things where you look at this and it's going to present other big threats because of what that outlet enables. That, like, do you want to spend your removal on this, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of going to be the issue is, do you spend the removal on the engine, or do you spend the removal on the piece that's going to like be what engine's getting?
Yeah, the fact that it's not a creature and it's not a planeswalker opens up a lot of things. Well, I shouldn't say it opens up things for you. It's just more of like it hits on an axis that some players might not think of immediately in terms of commanders being problematic, right? And so just really wanted to like touch on that aspect, because I feel like, between you, Callahan, and Pongo, you guys said a lot of the things that I was probably already going to say about Shorikai. So great.
Yeah. Next card on our list.
Gundam Shinji.
Get in the robot, Jeggy.
Yeah. I did watch that video.
That video was great. I helped contribute a little bit to that video. Next card on our list is a new Jeskai commander, which is Hinata Dawn Crowned, which costs 1 colorless and Jeskai, and is a legendary Kirin spirit that is a 4/4 with flying and trample, has 2 different static abilities. One says spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each target. The other static ability says spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast for each target. So there's a lot of pieces with this, obviously. I know Scoots has been really excited brewing around this recently. But Charles, when we look at this, I know everybody's first thoughts were, oh, this is Jeskai Grand Arbiter. But what is it really?
Okay, so
it's really not.
It is not.
Yeah, it's really not.
Yeah, it's not. It's like it's almost like oh man. I don't know how you describe it. So first of all, this is a good moment to shill about our Patreon. If you join, you have access to our Discord where you can see conversations where we have about cards like these. I know Ian's also working on this card as well.
Yeah, Ian's really excited about this card too.
And like the closest card that I think people will compare this to is Grand Arbiter, but it's not really, as Pongo said, because here's the thing about Grand Arbiter, right? And I'll defend Whimsy's case about it here, is that like Grand Arbiter will slow someone from playing a Rhystic Study or a Mystic Remora. This does not do that. But does this mean that this is worse than Grand Arbiter? No, that's not true either, right? Because what's the red spell that they play for removal for this? Do you know, Pongo, with Hinata?
Like straight red? Or is it multicolored?
No. Oh yeah. I think Aurelia's Fury.
Bifrost just costs 1 red now.
Yeah. Aurelia's Fury is one that people are playing. Bifrost is just destroy everything. Like once I start, like I'll just not stop. So you better take over.
There's so many X spells.
Yeah, there's
it makes
so
all
many.
The March cards really good.
Yeah. Well, particularly the Blue March, which I think we'll get to later. But Hinata does something better than Grand Arbiter, and also doesn't do things that Grand Arbiter is able to do either. It's just completely different. And I think that like when people see this, they'll think of it like Grand Arbiter, but when they play against it, they'll immediately realize that the person playing Hinata has a different play pattern entirely from what Grand Arbiter's play pattern is. And if you're going to treat this like a Grand Arbiter deck, you are going to be completely blindsided by
rude awakening. One thing that I think is really interesting with this is, like you said, it doesn't tax those Rhystic Studies. It doesn't tax those other spells. It taxes your counter spells, though. Yes. It taxes your removal. It taxes the things that deal with this, which is what's really cool about it.
Yeah, it's like a Thalia in a way, because here's the thing, like it's weird because Thalia and Grand Arbiter have similar effects in a way, but the way that people play Grand Arbiter and play Thalia are different, right? Because people will play Thalia almost as a defensive measure, whereas they play Grand Arbiter as a way to, either to combo off, oddly enough, with like a Future Sight combo, actually,
right.
or they or to just tax your opponents to slow them down. Thalia, at least in like Death and Taxes type of builds, like when we look at like Legacy and stuff like that, she plays an important role of making Lightning Bolt cost 1 more, and things like that. It makes your opponent have a harder time being able to interact. That's why we also, when we talk about like stacks, gridlocks, why sometimes you don't want to play Thalia, because the person that you're hinging on to play their counterspells cannot play their counterspells through a Thalia.
This makes delay 1 mana. That's so fucking stupid.
And so, I mean, Grand Arbiter does the same thing, but the thing is that, and you kind of touched on this, Callahan, is that the play style and approach that this card lends you to do makes you play it differently from how you would play Grand Arbiter, right? Parts of it makes you play it like you would play Thalia. Parts of it makes you play it like you would play Grand Arbiter. It's weird how such a similar looking effect can cause, and just throwing in an extra color can cause the card to just play completely different from its like kins in general.
It's a Jeskai card. It's not a blue-white card. And I love the design because they really nailed, without having to like devolve to like keyword soup or like the really generic ways of designing multicolored cards. They really nailed what a Jeskai card should do, which is, again, it's got this sort of slight taxing aspect to it, but then it's also got this like ritual aspect to it. But then it's also, very clearly kind of like aimed at you playing some of like those red kind of fireball-esque type cards, or, the ones that are targeting multiple players or targeting multiple permanents. It kind of just does a great job of capturing themes from the 3 colors that it's designed for. And you can really build it less in a cEDH context, but like, let's say in a more casual context, you could build it in a variety of different directions, leaning more into like any one of those 3 colors, and have, I would say, very unique decks depending on which direction you are leaning in. In cEDH, it's pretty clear to me that you are building this as kind of like a Jeskai Breach deck, and this is a powerful enabler for like a few cards that you're going to be playing. I don't know how deep into the actual like Hinata gimmick you want to go, as opposed to just playing reasonable cards that become like absurd with Hinata in play, right? Because it's easy to fall into this trap of playing a lot of cards that are like really not great until you have Hinata in play, and then the problem is that you're not always going to have Hinata in play, 1, and 2, people are going to fight you over Hinata. You're going to have games that are messy, and you're going to wish that, you were just playing your standard staple cards. But then the cards that are reasonable, like Bifrost, becoming utterly broken, right? Like with Hinata.
That's like the most absurd interaction, honestly.
But like even Heliod's Intervention is kind of like the same thing. But like instant speed, paradoxical outcome, kind of nutty because it's just like blue and you draw a bunch of cards.
Paradoxical outcome literally becomes ancient
ancestral,
ancestral recall.
Yeah, right. Ancestral recall.
Right. People are playing what's the other, Disorder in the Court, which is So like,
that's funny.
You get to investigate a bunch of times. But like additionally, you also get to like remove people's stuff. And like you can also use it to protect your own things. I mean, and like there's like twiddle effects that get discounted.
It reduces the cost of intuition because intuition targets.
Yeah,
100%.
It also reduces the cost of
and like Twin Flame and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it also reduces. Yeah, and you can strive Twin Flame as well with it. Yeah, Ian and I talked about that too. I mean, like it reduces the cost of Savine's Reclamation as well. Real quick, if you're flashing back Savine's Reclamation, you should read the fine print carefully. It doesn't reduce the flashback cost by 2; it only reduces it by 1. Because when you flash it back, it only actually targets one thing, and then it makes a second copy of itself that targets another thing.
Right.
So, and the reason why I'm emphasizing this is because, yes, it reduces the cost of intuition. I think it's important to note that intuition does target, right? But once again, we do want to like look back at this with like Grand Arbiter. Grand Arbiter also already did these things. The stuff with like Biforce, the Blue March, Heliod's Intervention, right? Paradoxical Outcome, like those things are things that Grand Arbiter can not go near. Yeah. And that's something that that like when you're considering about building Hinata, that's something that you like, that is the point of why you would play Hinata. And
the extra color. Yeah.
And so the other thing about like casting Hinata, I think you're also pretty spot on about it. I think it might actually suffer the same problems that, in some ways Elsha kind of sees, where, you just have to get this card out before you really do much of anything else.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the issue. I've talked about this before, where that I think one card, like 3 color commanders really struggle there, right? Because it's not just that you need to have it out, it's also that it's fairly difficult to cast. And so that is one of the things that's interesting about this is like Jewel Lotus doesn't work on this. Like well, Jewel Lotus, well, it does, but it
only makes 2 mana instead of 3.
Yeah. And so is, still you're not getting the full effect of it. But it's one of those things where when you look at it, there's a lot of powerful things that can do, and it will be very good. And this will absolutely go into a tournament and do well. And it's going to shake up the metagame in some regard because it's going to appear places. People are going to play this.
At least initially.
But it's, I don't know. And this is kind of the thing where, and I think since we've gotten single color partners, it's really kind of made single card 3 color decks
like
less
triple
good.
Pips. Yeah.
Like it's just one of those things where like it's almost made 3 color worse having like one partner, like Bant, for instance. Like I could build it a variety of ways, or I could do Yoshi and Thrasios, right? Or I could do one of the other Bant commanders. And it's just an interesting phenomena that I see happening where there's like this devaluement almost of the quality of these single card 3 color commanders because of the existence of single color partners. But that's like its own discussion. But
I get where you're coming from. I think that's just an inherent problem with partners though. But like you said, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. So the next card on our list is Satoru Umezawa, which is a 2/4 human ninja that costs a colorless, a blue, and a black. And it says, whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This ability triggers only once each turn. It also says each creature card in your hand has ninjutsu for the cost of 2 colorless, a blue, and a black. So Pongo, what this says is that Eldrazi Titans are now ninjas, right?
Yes, yeah. If Emrakul was legal in this format, Emrakul would be throwing kunai and jumping out of a tree, Naruto running, all the good stuff. But
Ulamog is for sure.
Ulamog definitely is Naruto running. Yeah. And his Annihilator is his ninja way.
We're literally talking about Naruto running right after we talked about Hinata.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's what do you expect? This is the weeb set.
I mean, I don't watch. I've not watched any episodes of Naruto. Okay, don't judge me. All right, anyone. But like, even I know that Naruto's like wife, I think at this point, is Hinata, right?
Yeah.
So it's wow.
Yeah.
What a segue.
The references keep building.
Oh yeah.
But
what
we
else is
saw
there to
that
say about this card? You know,
we saw though that like Ian had made a brew with this that looked kind of promising. Like this is going to end up seeing play. I don't know if this overtakes Yuriko, but kind of what's your take on this overall, Pongo?
I don't think this overtakes Yuriko. I think the issue is just that Yuriko offers too much of a consistent value plan, and is more resilient. Whereas this kind of, I would say, has a similar niche to like a Kalia as a type of deck, where you're sticking this and probably the turn is going around, and then you have kind of like a sneak attack type of effect. You still have to pay mana, but obviously you're kind of curving in a way that you anticipate being able to pay 4 to ninjutsu something in. So yeah, obviously you're going to try to put in something like a Razaketh, and I think that's probably one of the logical directions to go with this. Again, that's fairly similar to what you would expect to do with like Kali as a style of deck. The issue here being that people are going to understand that gimmick fairly quickly, and compared to a deck like Kalia, you are not really going to have, I think, as good of like a commander agnostic fallback game plan of just like putting an Adnals on the stack and doing that. Being able to rely on just the broken red cards that have been printed in recent years, to make your deck kind of just do the generically good red-black things. So this has that angle. It has another angle, which is, the triggered ability is okay. I think it's cool, but I don't necessarily think it's doing anything so radically different in the format that it's going to totally shake things up. We already know, like I was saying before, Kali is a sort of known quantity, and this is operating on a similar axis. And I don't know that putting it in blue really changes the equation that much.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. It's an interesting callback at the very least to Umezawa's from the past, and it's just very interesting card. Giving each creature card ninjutsu in your hand makes a lot of things. Like people have been like, "Oh man, you can make like Thassa's Oracle uncounterable," and I'm like, "Yeah, but you're taxing yourself." It just doesn't seem as good, right? Like,
that was sort of my particular issue about it, was that the ninjutsu cost is 4. And people don't
you're not putting little things into play, and the problem with anytime someone says, "Oh, Thassa's Oracle becomes uncounterable," like the counter to that is always, when's the last time you saw Thassa's Oracle be countered? Like it almost
nobody's
never
countering
happens.
the Thassa's Oracle. It's always
it's the consultation or the tainted fact, with the exception of like, oh, the blue players are tapped out and I'm playing Mardu and I have a red blast, right? Like then I'll counter the Thassa's Oracle. But like other than that, you almost never see it. So who cares about that? This is not Legacy, right? Like
now people.
I was gonna say if blue black is if this is your commander in blue black, I think there's also like the issue of like 4 mana to cast this, 4 mana to ninjutsu. Like that's pretty mana intensive for a color that doesn't actually focus on ramping. Oh, sorry, 3 mana to cast this, but like you don't. I guess you could go into combat, but then at that point you're lumping on to 7 mana total in a single turn, and that's like
not actually a discount.
You might as well just cast the spell, right? Like
I'm just thinking like, when does blue black want this, right? I feel like this might be better in the 99 if you're even considering this at all than it is as your commander. I saw Ian, brew this with higher and the playing with power stream and stuff. And I think that was actually something that Ian was very cognizant of. Like, we got to be cheap and frugal about how we're brewing this as a commander, because while it does sound cool to have Emrakul with Ninja Stars, it doesn't really sound cool to just have Emrakul sitting in your hand being a dead card.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Speaking of cards that will not be sitting in your hand dead, the next card on our list is Go-Shintai of Life's Origin. It is a 3/4 legendary enchantment creature with the enchantment subtype Shrine, and it costs 3 colorless and a green. It has a static ability and an activated ability. Its activated ability costs Wooburg and a tap to activate, and it says return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Its static ability says whenever Go-Shintai or another non-token shrine enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creature token. So, again, a reminder. Shrine is an enchantment subtype, not a creature subtype. So you can't throw like shape like changelings and shit into this and get triggers. They have to be like the shrine enchantments. Yeah. So
fun fact,
Charles,
is that these are 1/1 colorless creatures without any actual creature type, because they are only shrines.
Yes. And that's gonna be because of the way like shrines work, right? Is they trigger based on how many you have. But the big thing that I saw a lot of people see immediately with this, Charles, was the people saw this and went, "Oh, we can entomb reanimate omniscience."
I didn't even think about that yet. But that's pretty cool.
Charles is never thinking about what's the like broken thing I can do. Charles is thinking, what is the like cool,
the like most fair way I can do this?
I can do, yeah.
Okay, look, I'm thinking about this from like a game designers. Oh yeah, go ahead, Callahan first.
Yeah, I mean it's really honestly kind of a cool deck if you think about what you can do with the like enchantments you can entomb. And I could get into this later, but go ahead and say your piece. But that is a thing that you can do.
I mean, like, okay, so I get the fact that you could reanimate omniscience and all that stuff. And I think like Pongo's right about like one thing about me is that like, I don't know, I think more about a card of like, how do I, optimize this card to do what this card wants me to do, rather than how do I, abuse the living hell out of it. like the dog, like the dog and planeswalker combination, which we will not name. Right. and that comes from a more game design approach. My one critique about it is that, yeah, this is going to be like, something that Wizards will definitely regret, which is like this whole subtype thing to a card, because I can imagine so many players being like, what do you mean my mirror entity doesn't turn all my creatures into shrines? Right. And it's just so unintuitive. And I'm pretty sure that Mark Rosewater is going to write an article about this of being like, we can do better. Right. And we'll see something probably better in like a couple of years to come, because they're going to go into this lane with equipment creature, right, types. They're going to have to fix that, first of all. Now, in terms of like the whole omniscience thing, yeah, even if you're going to abuse the living hell out of a card and not do what the card is actually trying to set out to do, right? Like, it's not like I can intuit it while you're playing in a game and just completely deconstruct what's happening here. Like in regards to like that omniscience thing, the first thing in my mind is like, okay, cool, you have omniscience. What cards do you have in your hand? Yeah. Right. Like, do you have lands? Like, where's your card draw? Right. Because like the important like omniscience is so powerful. That's what
I was gonna say. Is as somebody who used to play an omniscience package in Rectorfit, is there were many times you could get the omniscience and then you were just sitting there and you're like, well, I have 4 lands, so that's cool.
Like I literally played a game like a year ago in a casual pod and someone lands in omniscience, and I'm playing like mono white super friends. And I just beat the guy with just a dozen planeswalkers, and he was like, I had omniscience out. And it's like, yeah, but what did you draw?
I had enough mana to cast all my spells too, like
yeah, no, exactly. It was like I played that one Commander Legends card that like returns your planeswalkers back from the grave, and it was just like, yeah, this is my omniscience right here, right? And this actually produced value. You laid an enchantment and you drew lands, right? From an empty hand, and like that, like this is not a challenge, right? At least when you have 5 colors, you should be able to, especially in cEDH, you should be able to generate some form of card advantage or card draw or card acquisition into your hand to make that omniscience thing work. It's just that my point is that there's nothing really to get excited over of just being able to reanimate omniscience, right? That's just part of that puzzle, right? And so
it's also like not especially like unfair when you're playing Wooburg and then like 4 mana before that, and like waiting a turn, like it's like quite a lot of setup to cheat the omniscience.
And to add to your point about that, you could literally just play Fist of Suns and just cast omniscience for just 2 cards instead of like 3 cards, and doing this like play a 4-drop, play a 1 mana like tutor, and then pay Wooburg when you could just spend 3 mana and then just cast omniscience from your hand.
Well, Fist of the Suns just makes Wooburg, no? I'm thinking of Channel of the Suns.
Yeah. Channel
Fist of the Suns works like Joda works.
Right. Yeah.
It's the original Joda.
Yeah. So one thing I don't love about this card that I'll just add as a final point is that it's just like, it's everything you could ever want if you were playing a Shrine deck, right? And it's just like, from my perspective, it's not a creative way to like really push me to do shrines. It's just like, oh, okay, it's kind of like the most generic possible reward for playing shrines, short of like drawing a card every time I play a shrine.
But I mean, there's like no shrine. Like there's no like shrines. Good. Like I kind of disagree with that, and I plan on doing a Callahan is here video about this card. But I actually think this is a very well-designed 5-color commander.
It's a good 5-color commander because it pushes you in a specific direction. It's just more that like the reward it gives you for going in that direction is kind of uninteresting in my opinion, because it is a shrine. It makes a shrine when it ETBs, and then when you cast your next shrine, you get an additional shrine. So I mean, I feel like it's about +3, right? Like
I feel like it is about as interesting as like Najeela is on that axis.
Oh man.
I mean,
shots fired.
Like, but I don't even particularly care, right? Because like maybe Najeela is, and I don't think that Gavin would disagree that Najeela is perhaps a bad design for like a warrior commander.
Right. Well, but my point is that I think they operate in similar realms in that regard, because what it's going to do is provide you a 5-color space to build what you want, but also nudge you in a direction of here's an incentive to also play some of these. Because you're like this is, I think as a casual commander, this is great because it gives the people who want to play shrines like a commander for their deck. As terms of like competitive like construction, I also think it's great from the perspective of you're not going to play like a zillion shrines in a competitive Go-Shintai deck, but it is going to incentivize you similarly to like that joke we make, Pongo, where it's like every time a new warrior comes out, you're just like, is this a Najeela card? I think this is similar in that regard, where it's going to do a thing, and then you're going to evaluate all these shrines of how do they fit into that game plan. And I think that's where it's going to end up fitting.
Sure, but just imagine this in a casual context where like when you build this deck, literally all you do is take every shrine that's been printed and you stick it in the deck. And like that, but there like you go, that's your deck.
That's not a thing you could do. Like this is at least cool, right? Like there's a cool factor to this of something that you can't do with other commanders. And it's cooler than like Kenrith.
It could have done more just things with enchantments, right? As opposed
to that's fair.
Like, which would make it sort of less linear in that respect. So I don't know. I'm not blown away by the design. I think it's very, very powerful though. In especially like in casual contexts. And I think shrine decks are now going to be like everywhere. A real thing that you see in casual. And you're
that's kind of exciting to me though.
Yeah, like some of those shrines when you've just got like +3 on them like right away are absurd. And
some of the shrines are great. And I think the fact that we can now, like, I could build a reasonable like shrines list that's competitive too. Like obviously that doesn't go all in on it, right? But I could build a Go-Shintai list and it will be pretty effective.
Hey, do you guys remember when? So I'm actually kind of in agreement with Pongo's point, but I also see where you're coming at, Callahan. I also just want to emphasize this, that Pongo is not the only one who has this view of this card being uncreative.
Yeah.
And Shivan Butt actually tweeted about this when it came out, echoing almost the exact words that Pongo said and sort of prophesizing what, players are going to be like when they build this deck, particularly if you're on this shrine game plan. I think that Callahan actually raises a very interesting fact about the fact that it doesn't have to be shrines, right? In fact, immediately, as Callahan was talking about this, I realized that the Mardu, there was a card I think in Commander Legends, the Mardu guy that swaps.
I think is his name.
Yeah, and he swaps enchantment for another one in your grave, like
not Geared. Sorry, is it Gen or yeah?
Yeah, something like that. But like, if you're already,
I'll put it on the screen and post.
It's Gen. Yeah. It's Gen.
Yeah, if you're going through the trouble of playing like tricolor, and once again, this is an interesting fact, is that the commander itself doesn't cost Mardu to cast. You can just put it out immediately, get some benefit already off of its trigger. And if you manage to hit Wooburg, you're kind of golden, right? And so I think that this is actually easier to play in an enchantment reanimator deck than it is to even play the Mardu enchantment reanimator commander, right? And that says something about sort of that type of flexibility that you can do with it. But the other thing is that, and going back to like Pongo's point, this is your shrine commander. Here you go, people who want to play shrine. And it's just going, I can already imagine like the popularity of shrine decks and sort of, this is sort of, and it just made me realize, like, do you guys remember when they printed, like every casual player really loves Solemn Simulacrum. Do you remember when they printed Solemn Simulacrum as a commander, right? Do you know where it is right now?
Yeah.
You know what, though? I will push back against that, though, because there is a difference there, right? So, and I plan to talk about this in the video I'm going to do about Go-Shintai.
Let's move on.
But I do want to touch on this, though, for a moment to give a distinction between this and Golos and Kenrith, because I do think it's very important to distinctualize these. This card is much more close to Sisei, Weatherlight Captain, and Najila in design than it is to Kenrith. And I think these types of commanders are way better for Commander as a whole than Kenrith and Golos are.
They're healthier.
And I don't think, I don't think this is going to end up like Golos. Like,
it wasn't about the fact that it has the same problems as Golos. It just has like, I think it's going to have like this moan and groan kind of thing, because people are like, this card is so cool.
Yeah.
And then after the 50th, all right, after
the tree 50th,
yeah.
After the tree 50th, like iteration where you're in a pod, random spell table game on that, I hate your deck Discord, and someone's like, hey, I'm going to play the Go-Shintai deck. Is like, I wonder what kind of commander this is going to be, right?
Yeah,
but I mean, some of the
Hondens are going to come down, and it's just forget about that game.
Is that any different though than like the first sliver? Is that any different than like Gisa Geralf? Is that like any different than any other like tribal commander though? Like any other tribal commander, like there are definitive like tribal commanders out there. Like,
I think there are. Yeah,
I don't think that's any different.
No. So here's the funny thing is that I think what's weird about like Gisa and Geralf is that there are different ways that you can play zombies. I think that everybody's going to play like freaking Rooftop Storm, right? But like, but the journey to getting there is not necessarily deterministic, right? Whereas I think in Go-Shintai you can literally like you don't even have to know what's in your opponent's deck list. You're just going to be like, okay, all right, red Honda and blue Honda and yada yada.
There's just also so many zombies that you can actually have a variety of decks while playing all good zombies. There's not enough shrines. Just like take all the shrines and put them in your deck. And,
and every shrine has like this template.
Gets progressively better.
Yeah, well, it's not that it gets progressively better. What I'm talking about is that it's very cookie cutter and very generic in a way. Like they're not really doing like interesting things. Like imagine if they printed a card, and Wizards, I guess you can plug your ears because legally you're not supposed to hear about this. But like imagine if they did a card that wasn't just, for each shrine you control, draw a card, but instead like, counter target spell unless its controller pays X, where X is the number of shrine you control, and the spell itself is like like a shrine spell. Like it's an enchantment it's an enchantment instant or whatever.
When it enters the battlefield, counter target spell, and it's a shrine.
And it has flash. Yeah, exactly, right. And so like that, it lets it so that you're not playing just copy paste. Static shrines. I mean, they're already kind of doing this with shrine creatures, but there's nothing that actually encourages the creature aspect. It's just, this affects my shrine count, but I actually don't care about combat. I don't really care about blocking. I don't care about anything that creatures care about doing, right? And that's sort of like, I think, where Pongo and I are at, where it's like, okay, well, this is a really cool commander for kind of like what, or at least I'm saying, this is a really cool commander. I agree with you. This is a cool commander, but as a shrine player, I would just be like, I'm going to play this, and people are going to just be like, well, you're just, we already know what your deck does, right?
Yeah. I don't know.
And it's hard to interact with a lot of enchantments. Let's not forget.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, I guess to me, I look at this and I would take 100 of this over 100 gold, like more Golos any day of the week, or more Kenrith. Like I just like if we're going to get 5 color commanders, this is the way I want to see them be built.
I would just love for it to be slightly less directed, right? Like slightly, like make it a little, like I was saying before, like make it care more about enchantments generally. And it can have an ability that pushes you in the direction of shrines a little bit. Like make it a shrine, for instance. Just that on its own means that like, oh, now all my shrines have +1. Just from my commander being in play, and then it gives additional value for enchantments, right? Like, because then and it does something else that enchantments like you to be doing. Because at that point, you could build the deck with just like your favorite shrines, and do like all kinds of other enchantment themes. But this is just shrines. Like
that makes sense. The last important thing to note about this is another one of those commander cards that can only be picked up in set booster packs. This and Yoshimaru are the two like commanders that are only available in set booster packs.
Well, there's also the Myojins, but
no, I don't care about that.
Yeah, they can't even be your commanders.
Yeah,
like, I mean, they can.
You can cast it with the command zone,
but they don't function.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my god.
Which is obviously very on purpose, but we're not gonna dig into that.
I'm in line with the stars, I'm in sync with the earth. 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'ma ride for the squad, let her ties in the hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I'm never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap. Got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, do that ass survive, doing 80 to the house. Then I hit it to the sky, change haters on a tirade. Talking to the crib in the face, be still, let that hate stuff fade. We all want the same, we all want a meal in the safe. I wanna talk, but the last one they hear, eyes blurry, but I couldn't see the ass.